So what is a function in JavaScript? A lot of times you are going to want to do things in your application. And anytime that you want to perform a task, you are going to run a function. Basically, a JavaScript function is a block of code that is designed to perform a task, and it's executed when something invokes this function. And that's either you, the user, or maybe an external script or a timer. And we have a couple different ways of introducing functions into our scripts. The first way is called a function declaration. A function declaration is basically a block of code that is declared and basically set aside to be used later. It is not invoked right away like a function expression would be, which I'll show you next. The way we would write a function declaration is by typing the word function and then the name of your function. Let's call this function test. And then within these parentheses are where your parameters are going to go. And for this one, I'm not going to have any parameters. I'm going to keep it really simple. So let's just have this test function console.log running. Simple as that. So this is a function declaration. The other type of function that we can introduce is called a function expression. With a function expression, you are basically assigning a function to a variable, and a lot of times that function is going to be anonymous.
I'm anonymous! I'm anonymous! I'm anonymous! Larry David is anonymous!
So the way we would write that would be to create a variable. So let's call our variable test, and variable test equals function and then your function. And the difference between a function expression and a function declaration is that this function expression down here is going to run right here when we declare this, when we create this variable. This function is going to run. This function declaration is not invoked immediately. It is set aside for later until we call the actual function. And there's a couple different ways that these two are different. I renamed this variable here to test2 so it's not confusing. A function declaration, like the one we have up here, is hoisted. There's something in JavaScript called hoisting, and where your functions that you declare are actually hoisted to the top of your script. And JavaScript is interpreted from the top down. So we have our function declaration test up here, and we actually have our function expression, the variable test2, down below it. If I was to call this function test2 right here, this would throw an error because this variable test2 down here has not been created yet according to the JavaScript interpreter. Our function test here has already been hoisted. So if we were to go move these down a little bit, if I was to run test, this would run the function because of a hoisting. So that's one of the most important things to remember with the differences between function declarations and function expressions is hoisting. So what about parameters? Let's introduce some parameters to our function test. Let's get rid of our function expression down here and actually just work with our function declaration test. So say we want to add 2 parameters to this function. Let's create a function that takes in 2 parameters which are multiplied together, and let's return the product of those 2 numbers. So let's go A and B. This is how you name your parameters in your function. And let's have our function return A times B. And the JavaScript operator for multiplication is that asterisk that I used up here, right here. That is what the operator you're going to use when you want to multiply values. When you're adding values, you just use a plus sign. When you're subtracting values, you use a subtraction sign. When you're dividing values, you use a slash, like that. So we have our function test right here, which takes in 2 parameters, A and B. Let's return A times B. So how would we call this function if we were using it in an application or in a web page? You would write test and then your parameters. So say we want to multiply 5 and 10. This right here would return 50. So let's actually see this in action in an HTML page, an HTML element. So let's go over to our index.html, which I just created, a very simple HTML skeleton. We have up here, we have our HTML tag, which encapsulates all of our HTML elements. We have our head tag, which is going to have our scripts and our links, our CSS links. We have our body tag, which is going to encapsulate our content. And so I want to have just a simple paragraph tag. So we have a p tag. And within that p tag, I'm going to have a, let's say, just the number 0. And let's give our paragraph tag an ID so we can target it with some CSS. Let's give it an ID of test. Let's just keep it simple. And up here, let's add some CSS so we can see our p tag. Let's make it the font pretty big. Let's go ID of test has a font size of 60 pixels. So what do we have here? We have a paragraph tag, and within that we have the number 0. Let's go back to our script. And let's change our function to, instead of return a value, let's actually have it target our HTML element and insert that into the DOM. Let's go document.get element by ID. Within those quotes, we're going to go test dot inner HTML equals A times B. Now let's go back over to our index.html page. Let's create a button down here. Let's give that button an on click. And call our function when we click this button. Our function was called test. Within test, our function, remember our function takes 2 parameters, 2 numbers, so let's put the numbers, I don't know, random, 456 and 8,734. So we have our function right here. When we click this button, on click, run the function test with parameter A, 456, and parameter B, 8,734. Let's actually go up here to our paragraph tag and add a text align of center so we can see it a little better, center of the page. And let's go over to our button and just add the word submit. So when we click our submit button, we're expecting our function to run. Let's go to our browser and refresh the page. Submit. Hey, look at that. So we've created a basic JavaScript function that takes in 2 parameters, 2 numbers, multiplies them both, and then targets our paragraph tag right here and inserts that return value into the HTML. In the next video, I want to get into actually building out a web page using HTML and CSS and including JavaScript as well.